Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event exploring key trends in the PR and communications industry in 2021. I'm Koray Kamgoz. I'm the PRCA's Director of Communications and Marketing, and I'm really excited today to be joined by 6 industry leaders who'll be sharing their ideas on what we can all expect in the year ahead. We've had a really brilliant response to this event, so thank you for signing up. We've had more than 450 people sign up from all around the world. So thank you all very much for your support and look forward to hearing from you at the end. So the way this is going to work is that we'll be hearing 6 5-minute quickfire presentations from each of our guests. And at the end of all the presentations, we'll hold a brief Q&A. So if you do have any questions for the panelists, do feel free to drop that into the Q&A box. And we'll try to work through as many of those as we can at the end of the session. Lastly, if you're on Twitter, feel free to join in the conversation using hashtag PRCA Trends. And we will do a quick summary of all the best bits at the end of the session. So to kick things off, first off, we have Vikki Chowney, who's Global Head of Content and Publishing at Hill & Knowlton Strategies. Vikki has spent 13 years building and leading digital content teams. She leads H&K's team of content and publishing experts around the world. She's now based in New York. She was previously at H&K London, defining the agency's approach to the content and publishing strategy discipline. In her talk, she'll be leaning into content trends with a healthy dose of optimism and reflecting on the lessons that we can take from last year into 2021. So with that in mind, we'll kick things off with Vikki. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Well, good morning, everyone, and happy Inauguration Day, because I'm joining you from New York this morning. I'm thrilled to be kicking things off. It's somewhat chilly over here, snowing, in fact. But I think there's a definite air of optimism, as you just heard. 2020 was a tough year for everyone. And while the vaccine is still rolling out with increasing pace, I think we're very much all aware that we're still in the weeds. But I think what I found the most impressive about this remote working world was the sheer resilience and creativity that I've seen in finding new ways to produce amazing work. And for me, I think so much of that will stay with us. Not only has it changed the way that we approach making content, but also client expectations are mirroring that. So as I said, I'm choosing to take a glass half full approach and take the positives that this new world has forced us into and really kind of continue that onwards and create cost efficiencies, more connection and a broader reach. So I'm going to give in the next few minutes just a summary of the 5 key things that I think we'll see continuing from a content perspective into 2021. So the first thing is remote directing. What we learned in the past 12 months is that we can use technology really effectively to still guide and support the filming process, whether that's getting our creative team on a Zoom from New York with a director in LA and our clients in Tokyo alongside a production crew, or whether we're just taking an exec through kind of retakes on a one-to-one basis. Really just being there in any way that we can talk people through a shoot really produces great results, and it's the person and their ability to creatively direct that counts. The second thing is an acceptance of more rough and ready content. I've been talking for years about the benefits of more raw, realistic content that doesn't feel so premium, especially when we think about social content. But I think in the wake of people self-filming, 2020 was the year that this finally hit home with a lot of our clients. One of my favorites was the video edits that we did for Adidas's The Huddle series, which paired people having really interesting conversations in the early days of lockdown, like Pogba and Stella McCartney. And these were quick turn edits intended to be really timely and relevant versus overly worked. The third thing for me is greater inclusivity. So I talked about extended reach earlier, and I love that the things that once upon a time we would have hosted as very private events now have a greater audience. When I think about examples of that, for P&G's collaboration with Queen Latifah's Queen Collective, which supports female filmmakers, we managed and moderated an Instagram Live with this year's cohort of female filmmakers, which is actually quite difficult to say. And the engagement that we saw there was amazing. And the fact that such an important conversation about a really big topic was open to a much bigger audience is absolutely something that I know we'll see continuing as an ongoing trend. Number 4 is then humanizing key spokespeople. So again, people filming from their homes has opened up a whole new side to understanding each other's worlds. And what I'm definitely seeing is execs and leaders leaning into doing the same thing. So, an example of that for me is that we shot an Ask Me Anything style video for the leader of a B2B tech client just a few months ago, which saw him answering questions from his employees, media and beyond. And that's just not necessarily something or a tactic we would have been planning for that particular client pre-pandemic. And then finally, finding shared values, I think it is what we're seeing influencers leaning into, and making them more likely to contribute and go above and beyond what's in their contract. So many of the influencers that we work with at the moment are now looking to use their platform and influence to support bigger things outside of just product placement, whether that's supporting a local community, sustainability, or the impact that the pandemic has had on employment or health. And for me, it's really heartening to see this. And I think it's our responsibility as communicators to connect our clients with those that have the same motivations. And I think that for me is really exciting to see.
Thank you very much.
Almost bang on my 5-minute mark.
I was just about to say you've kept the time really well there. So you've set the bar very high for everyone else. But thanks very much for that, Vikki. That was fascinating. Next up, we have Stephen Waddington, who is managing partner at Wadds Inc. and visiting professor at Newcastle University. Stephen is a professional advisor to agencies and comms teams. He works with organizations to help manage transformation and scaling. He founded Rainer PR and Speed, and most recently held leadership positions at Meteor and Ketchum. So Stephen's going to be talking about startups and scaling in 2021. So Stephen, over to you.
Cheers, Corey. Thank you. So thank you to everyone that's joined today. I look forward to the conversation. I'm very, very firmly optimistic at the year to come. And I want to talk specifically about agency startups and scaling in the current market, and share with you my optimism. So COVID-19 has been a crisis with 2 distinct and very contrary economic outcomes. It's been a massive boom for online retail, for big tech and for healthcare, but it's been a bust, unfortunately, for areas of the economy aligned to culture, entertainment, hospitality, travel and events. Public relations sits in the professional services market. It fell around a quarter in April 2020, but according to the latest data from the Office for National Statistics, its monthly index for October, it's recovering and recovering strongly. And that certainly reflects anecdotal evidence that I've heard from PRCA members that speaks to that trend. As to what we're going to see for the UK economy specifically this year, GDP fell by about 10% last year. Forecasts from analysts such as KPMG suggest that we're going to see growth this year of around 4% and then 5% next year. So the economy is going to rebound, and it's going to rebound quickly over the next 2 years, and that gives huge cause for optimism. The challenge is for the government as it looks to recovery is that the economic impact of COVID hasn't been equal across society. So we've got middle class professionals in secure work that have worked from home. They've managed to save money on commutes, and they've seen their equity and property investments rise, and they've stayed safe. Meanwhile, people in public health and public service and roles such as couriers, postal workers and other supermarket staff on the front line have been at the forefront of the crisis. We owe them a huge, huge debt. And then you've got freelancers, people in our own market, people working in areas of the economy that have shut down, have simply had an awful time. I've read about a dozen economic reports and trend reports in preparation for this session, and identified around 8 themes where organizations need help as we emerge from COVID. In my view, any of these are the basis of a really solid agency proposition. I'm just going to list them. So the first thing is, particularly post-Brexit, Britain's place in the world as it trades and looks to rebuild relationships post its relationship with the European Union. The recovery and rebuild to come post COVID-19, number two. Number three, the climate crisis, almost in my estimation, a bigger issue than COVID-19 itself. Number four, I've already spoken about societal fractures. Number five, the huge trend that Vikki's also already talked about, that we've seen in the dispersion of education, of healthcare, of retail and work. Number six, media change, both in terms of social and what's happening with the platforms and mainstream media. Number seven, the issue of misinformation. And number eight, workflow automation and artificial intelligence. And I think these 8 trends are going to define the economy for the next 2 to 5 years. I want to talk specifically about the opportunity for value creation in the agency market. Now, agency holding groups have spent the last 3 to 4 years consolidating acquisitions and transformation. They've only been acquiring to plug portfolio gaps. COVID-19 has accelerated transformation in those groups, but their share price stagnation, particularly versus big tech and healthcare, it's making it hard to create further value. And I think deal flow and growth is going to remain challenging in that market. The independent market is more interesting though, and the area where I work. So founders and agency teams that were reluctant to sell in 2020, fearing weak valuations and instead have focused on the fundamentals of building an agency business, so cash, transformation, and leaning into the areas of opportunity, some of those that I've already said. Exit opportunities, and I think we're going to see exit opportunities for founders and teams in this market remain, particularly amongst agencies that want to build scale or they want to seek strategic merger and acquisition opportunities. There's also a real growing interest in alternative means of realizing value. So there's some really interesting things being done around management transitions, around creating secondary businesses and investment in management buy-ins and buyouts. And that's something I think a really interesting area of the market to watch. There's a huge wall of capital though building amongst private equity groups, both in the US and Europe, as deal flow during this period has completely halted. I think that's a situation that's going to continue through 2021, this uneasiness. But I think as the market picks up later this year in Q4, it's going to boom, and we'll see that boom continue into 2022. Interesting data point, there were more than 30 agency startups in the UK in 2020, more than we've seen in a long time. There'll be even more in 2021 is my estimation, because now is a brilliant time to start building an agency or to scale an existing agency and benefit from the low cost of goods, talent, and the boom that is surely to come. And my tip will be to look at the opportunities that I cited at the outset of this session and lean heavily into those. That's me. I look forward to hearing from my colleagues, and back to you, Corey, hopefully within time.
Perfect. Yes, Wadds, nicely done and nicely kept to time. Thank you very much for that. Just a quick reminder to everyone, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, and we'll try and run through as many of those as we can at the end. So thank you again, Stephen. Next up, we have Shayoni Lynn, who is Director and Principal Consultant at Lynn PR. Shayoni is a Fellow of the CIPR and the PRCA and Chair of the PRCA Cymru Group. She also represents Wales on the UK PR Council, where she leads the stream on ethics. And today she'll be talking about behavioural science in communications and PR. So Shayoni, it's over to you. I think you're on mute, Shayoni.
Apologies.
Okay.
I was just saying, bear with me whilst my very slow computer catches up with the 21st century. And in that vein, we'll be switching off my video because of the lag.
Sure, no problem.
There we go. So thank you, Cora. I am here to talk to everyone about the emergence and wider acceptance of behavioral science in PR and communications. Those who know me won't be surprised, that's what I'm here to talk about. We are already seeing this at Lynn PR, where more and more clients are approaching us for our data-driven behavioral science methodology. When I set up Lynn PR, I kept getting asked, and I still keep getting asked, how do we convince clients to pay for research? And the answer is that our work speaks for itself. Time after time, we deliver solid, tangible results that go beyond things like reach and even engagement. And that's down to our application of behavioral science in communications. So things that we are doing using behavioral science, things like improving vaccination take-up, convincing people to adopt protective behaviors, getting people to access key mental health services, engaging people so they're directly contributing to organizational consultations, persuading people to spend more to regenerate local economies. And at the heart of it all lies a robust application of behavioral science and data-driven stratcoms. And it breaks down into three key areas: data, behaviors, and testing. All right. So this is David Halpern, who is the chief exec of the Behavioral Insights team, also known as the Nudge Unit. And he said, do we stumble blindly, or do we seek to understand these influences and these choices? The answer is that we simply cannot afford to stumble blindly anymore. Now more than ever, we need to embrace a data-driven strategic approach to communications, and that starts with a much deeper understanding of audiences, including why they behave the way they do, why they make the choices that they do, and what would drive them to take action. Because by investigating and understanding our audiences better, by gaining deeper insights into their attitudes, their habits, and their preferences, we can ensure that our communications remain relevant, meaningful, and as effective as possible. So let's talk about behavioral insights and why that's important. So simply put, behavioral insights help unlock how people make decisions. So it provides a deeper understanding on the conscious and the unconscious motivations that drive decision making. A behavioral approach to comms can help your audiences adopt more positive behaviors, which could improve their lives. And really, it's all about using the user, all about understanding the user in their local environment. This is really key. Behavior change is all about local context. So an application of behavioral science, and that includes things like behavioral economics and nudge theory, can help strengthen content, increase the visibility of calls to action, and encourage users to take action. So let's go back to that slide where I outlined the three elements to my prediction of an emergence of behavioral science in PR and comms. It starts with data, and shout from the rooftops about this all the time. As a profession, we need to embrace data and use it more widely in our programs. So that includes, when thinking about a behavioral approach to comms, data insights are vital because they tell us which interventions or solutions have worked, which haven't, whether the results to these interventions, whether the results are statistically significant, and whether interventions replicate. And I'll talk about replication in a bit. But really, data helps also monitor behavior in real time. It's a really solid tool, well, it's a key tool in any practitioner's toolkit to ensure that we're continually delivering value. The next is behaviors. And when I say behaviors, I don't necessarily mean how our audiences react with our brand or our organization. Where behavioral science comes into play is both an understanding of the conscious motivations and also the unconscious ones. And they include an understanding, an appreciation, and an application of the cognitive biases that exist in all of us as a species, as a human species. And we need to understand how these biases, these unconscious motivations, affect things like organizational or brand proposition, brand recall, consumer action, retention, loyalty. So it's really important to understand how your audiences make their choices so you can design better environments for them. So in behavioral science, we call this choice architecture. What's that? Well, you're a choice architect if you directly or indirectly influence the choices that others make, which is what we all do on this webinar. So if you're a choice architect, then you can design the choice environment. Aim to create the best possible choice environment that helps your audiences make better decisions quicker, and hopefully once they improve their lives. And as choice architects, always think about human factors and how you can incorporate this into your design and your development. And then finally, testing. Testing is very important because, as I said before, behavioral science suffers from a replication crisis. That means what an intervention that works in a specific context may not work at all in another context. So it's really important to constantly remember that behavior change is about context. So tailor interventions to local context, use data insights to see what works and what doesn't, and always test. So what could you test? Pretty much everything. At Lynn PR, we test everything from content to creatives to calls to action. Test always in a randomized way, because of course, as human beings, we're susceptible to several biases. And the moment we don't randomize, biases creep in. So test in a randomized way, extract your data insights, learn from your test insights, and continually adapt your program using these test insights to ensure that you're responding to your audience's reactions and their responses in a very agile, flexible way. And that's really the trajectory we've seen at Lynn PR, where we have grown at scale. Stephen's talking about startups that scale. We're lucky to have him as a non-exec on our board, but that's exactly what we've done. We've embraced the pandemic in a way that is fruitful to the business, and we've used these techniques to ensure that campaigns deliver results. That's it from me, Koray.
Thank you very much for that, Shayoni. That was fascinating. If you could stop sharing your screen, that would be great. Thank you. We will now move on to, thanks, Shayoni. We'll now move on to our next speaker, Adrian Ma. So Adrian is the founder and managing director of Fanclub PR. Before setting up Fanclub, he helped found the digital PR practices of 3 agencies and ended up as head of a technology PR agency. Adrian will be talking about PR's role in creating data. So Adrian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. With apologies to my forecasters around here, I'm going to start off with a terrible joke. There are 2 types of forecasters, the ones that don't know anything and the ones that don't know they don't know anything. But there is a bit of method that we can apply. I learned from someone much smarter than I am, a writer and ping pong player called Matthew Saeed. I don't know if any of you guys have ever come across him. Brilliant thinker. But basically, if you take all of the forecasts together and take the average of those forecasts, you can create a more accurate forecast, sometimes up to 15% more accurate. So for this forecast, a couple of weeks ago, PR Week published an article where they rounded up a load of PR agency leaders, about 50 of us, and said to us, can you contribute 21 words to tell us what your predictions are for 2021? And I had a look at that, and broadly speaking, everyone came up with the same 6 themes. And here's the rundown of the themes from least popular to most popular. I feel like I'm doing the top 10. But the least popular, with just 2 people saying, was the changing digital landscape is going to be the big thing for 2021. Second least popular was, with 3 people saying this, was the changing media and news landscape. Right in the third least popular, proving the value of PR. Okay, now it's up to the top 3. At number 3, the big thing was about workforce diversity and welfare and communications. Second most popular, which I thought would be the most popular, was ESG, purpose, lots of nods, yes. And then the most popular was loads of PR agencies talking about how great their commercials are going to be in 2021 and the economic bounce back. And I think there's a load of really interesting stuff in there. And, to be fair, my contribution to that article didn't stray very far from the majority. But if I cast my mind back to last year, there's one thing, a conversation that I had with a client that really, really struck out. And this was about the purpose of PR and the value of PR. And so this client is super, super clever. And he said to me something which blew me away. And he said, I think the role of PR is to create data. That the data that we create is the value. And that's interesting, because quite often the lens that I use about data is, you use data as a starting point and then you use it to prove the value of PR at the end of it. But you don't necessarily think about PR as creating data that is of value. And I find myself having a similar conversation with more and more clients. And in the business context, when we look at the companies that are doing really well at the moment, these are the guys that are deploying the use of big data and automation really, really well. Those are the ones that are really beating the FTSE 100, the ones that are beating all the economies. But in the PR world, we haven't really changed the way we've done our job. In fact, the way we've done our job is pretty similar to what we've been doing in the last few decades. And, you know, there's very, very little automation as well. When we compare this to marketing, it's a different story. There's a guy called Scott Brinker, and he's a blogger over at HubSpot. And every single year, he creates this incredible infographic which attempts to collect and categorize the whole marketing technology landscape. And in the first iteration of this in 2011, there were 150 companies in this. Last year, in April last year, this landscape contained 8,000 companies. And at the same time, PR's place within this marketing ecosystem, or the evolution of PR, let's say, has stalled. If you search for public relations within the infographic, you're going to have a bit of a job on your hands. It occupies just one of the 49 categories listed, less than 5% of the overall space. So if Scott is correct, there are far more marketing workflow management tools than there are technology products for the entire PR industry. And likewise, influencer marketing, which is a discipline which we hadn't really heard of a decade ago, already has a larger technology ecosystem than public relations. So PR, it remains one of the most powerful and impactful and cost-effective methods for generating brand awareness and managing reputation, but it hasn't really moved as fast as other marketing disciplines out there. But that changes, I hope, this year. We're hearing more and more people talk in PR using the same data-driven language as other marketing tactics, and I think this is really, really exciting. Now, the concept of integrated marketing has been around for a while, you know, and that's the need for several marketing tactics to work together towards a common goal. But it's not always applied in the right way in PR. But as Vikki mentioned in her role, you know, she's all about the role of content in the wider marketing ecosystem. What we're seeing more and more is the merging of owned and earned into one place. And in fact, the PRCA's own digital and PR communications report last year said that 61% of all PR and comms departments are responsible for both digital and social content, and that's up 4% on the year before. So we're seeing this wonderful merger of these two worlds, and actually PR is really well placed to take to make this really effective and take control of the content. And that's for two reasons. The first one is that PR provides a bit of a smell used to hone their campaigns. If we come up with an idea and if we can pitch it to a journalist or an editor and they publish it, that is a proof point to show, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting and it's going to work really, really well for content. And the reverse is also true as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which I think is even more important, is that content provides somewhere where PR audiences can be sent. So PR is often thought of in the service of brand awareness or brand alignment, for which it's super effective. But today, marketers are under even more pressure to deliver more value from their work. And this is where the content comes in. A combined effort with content and PR allows the same underlying material to provide more data, better analytics than PR in isolation. And this brings us back to the conversation. The role of PR is to create data. If PR is combined with content marketing, and that content could sit, for example, in a gated place on a website, or is viewable or downloadable in return for sharing some contact details, or for some value exchange, that's super powerful. And also, those digital marketers can drop cookies onto that visitor for retargeting later on, provided all of this is obviously GDPR compliant. Then it's a case of tracking that customer through the funnel and tracking them through that journey. And where it can, PR should be tracking those leads and mapping those journeys where we can. And if we can do that, we create more trust in PR as an effective tool. And an example for that for us is just before Christmas, we worked with an e-commerce platform, not on the high street. And as Stephen said, posties have been working really, really hard through the pandemic to deliver things to us. And we launched a campaign with those guys to say thank you to posties, and to do that you can nominate them for Britain's Best Postie. And we had 20,000 nominations of posties, and we were able to collect a load of data there. So this brings me back to a separate conversation with a client. And this guy, again, super clever. He's ex-senior marketer at Google and PepsiCo. And he said, I have a lot of conversations with CEOs about the value of PR. And the things I hear are, how do I measure it? What are the metrics? And a lot of those companies are run by upper left brain types. They're very focused on numbers, very focused on the results. And when you can provide any kind of metrics, if you can't provide the kind of metrics that can get their head around, they're just not interested. They can't provide, they're not interested in the value. So for me, this year, I'm excited about the opportunities, the convergence of contents and analytics and PR creating data. And this means that we can create even more value through our work.
Thank you very much, Adrian. That was fascinating, a really interesting take from you. Thank you. Thanks also to all of our audience members who've been putting their questions into the Q&A box. Our panelists are answering some of those already, but we'll try and get through as many as we can at the end of the session. So it's time to move on to our next guest. So we've got 4 presentations down so far, and there are 2 to go. Next up, we have Michelle Goodall. Michelle is CMO at Access Intelligence Group. Her portfolio of software brands for the marketing and communications industries includes Vulio, Pulsar, ResponseSource. And today, Michelle will be talking about how we use behavioral data to inform messaging, creative, targeting, and partnerships. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you very much. Lovely transition and an unmute there. I think, as you know, everybody here has said, and Wadds, you know, basically said that these are the 8 trends. The reality is that all of us could have picked from so many trends today. And in fact, in December at Vulio, we asked communication experts, including Sarah Waddington, Kerry Sheehan, Mark Pinson, you as well, Corey, Ella Minty, Advita Patel, Stuart Thompson, and many others to highlight their trends for 2021. Now, I promise I haven't stolen their ideas when we published their thoughts on the Vulio blog, but they included pretty much everything that we've discussed today, as well as ESG, AI, post-truth era, communications in a world of disinformation, professionalism of communications, and I think also the lack of space in public affairs with COVID and Brexit dominating political discourse. But the thing that I think that you know, everybody is making here, and the point that we're making, is that many of us have lived through really troubled times, and we can all learn from our own history, but history as a whole, that in difficult times it's a catalyst for reflection and innovation. And crisis can be a really big reset button and an opportunity to think differently and approach our challenges in a different way. Now, as with Adrian, I see many communications and marketing professionals doing exactly this, whilst managing all of the challenges that they have around their own well-being, their colleagues' well-being, improving on professionalism, and also juggling personal and family issues, stress, isolation, and everything involved in that. And we are all getting through this together. And I think it's right to be optimistic about things, and it's right to reflect and to say, you know, actually, there are some real frontline heroes amongst us. And thank you very much. You know, from my heart, there's a lot of gratitude for those people who are really sort of, you know, nose to the grindstone day in, day out, because this is pretty traumatic times for everybody. So you certainly have my gratitude. I'm not going to repeat what Corey said, but you know, we have a suite of tools for PR communications and marketing professionals, and our clients include governments, organisations, agencies, NHS, central and local government, Aegon, Lotus, Nintendo, and the WWF. And it's unsurprising that the trend that I'm going to pick out is in relation essentially to data, and data that can be used for not just communications, because again, we're probably going to have questions around this, but also marketing and that converged space around paid, owned, earned, and also shared as well. So the trend that I want to highlight today is that actually I think in comms as a sector, there is an evolving understanding of the breadth of data that's available to us to help shape messaging, creative, campaigns and content. And there is a growing data maturity amongst, I think, the leading brands, the leading organisations and agencies and specialists, and an appreciation of the sheer amount of qual and quant data. And it's interesting that Adrian is talking about us creating data, because that's very much part of it as well. Now, this data, of course, is enables us to develop insights and to measure the impact of our work. And I think there's an increasing sophistication in the way that agencies and brands and organisations are capturing, tracking and analysing that data to inform corporate communication strategies, brand messaging, creative, content strategy, campaigns, and even which influencers or communities and communities of interest to focus on, to drill into, to work with, and so much more beside. And the point that I want to make is that it isn't just about the data that we sort of recognise already, for example, social media data, but actually blending and combining multiple sourced data, including media data, social media data, search data, web analytics, and I think importantly, our first party data. And that might be things, for example, like customer satisfaction feedback surveys. It might be panel data, audiences that we're tracking over time, which aligns to what Shayoni was saying as well. And this is about creating data and actionable insights to inform campaign, creative, content, strategy and messaging over a period of time, because conversations do change and the way that we describe and talk about things change as well. So we're moving from simple brand, competitor and messaging monitoring, certainly in social media, and that's important, but moving towards something more sophisticated. And what does that actually mean in reality rather than in the abstract? Now, I don't have time for an in-depth case study today, and there are lots on the Pulsar website, but I'm just going to touch on some ideas here. We know that different people and different groups of people talk about the same topics differently. For example, amongst my personal groups and professional groups and connections on social, I'll talk about topics like Brexit, COVID, shopping, broadband, charity campaigns like Giving Tuesday. And the way that we discuss them as a group and talk about them will be different to other groups. And those groups discussing the same topics actually now, with technology, can be segmented by demographic data, socioeconomic data, media, influencer and brand affinity, their interests, their habits, their mindsets. And being able to identify how lots of different audience segments or communities and groups talk about specific topics, brands and issues in social media, and seeing how that changes over time can inform the shape of your campaigns and messaging over time. You know, the nudge theory, the ability to be able to change and adapt your messaging strategy. So an example here is how different groups talk about children's charities over a year and at peak times in the charity world, such as Giving Tuesday, which is after Black Friday and Cyber Monday, or fundraising events. And then how that relates to audience behaviours, such as intent to donate, to which charity and through which payment platform, and then how that translates to related Google searches that will indicate a strong intent to support or a cause or a charity, such as how do I volunteer for the NSPCC, or where to donate for the cat's protection. And now these things can also be tracked as well over time, and analysing the shape of what different audiences and stakeholders care about, talk about, how that changes and evolves over time, and the connection between what they actually say and discuss and what they actually do, their behaviours, is becoming significantly easier. And this is where technology comes in, because it's a trend that's powered by increasingly accessible technology. So what Adrian was saying is that PR and comms technology only takes up a very small proportion of Scott Brinker's Martech, kind of tracking study. But actually, the reality is, for me, it's about PR and communications taking the marketing communications technology and actually adapting it to their strategy as well. So I'm rounding up by saying, there is a webinar on this that I'm going to be tweeting later on today to actually show how a agency have used communities to develop brand comms narrative and to segment to different audiences and groups and communities at a later stage. So yeah, I'll tweet that on Green Wellies later on.
Thank you very much for that, Michelle. That was fascinating. And we've had a few people ask about recordings for this event. And just to confirm, this will be available in full on our YouTube channel from tomorrow. So if you've got any colleagues or friends who'd like to be interested in watching this back, do feel free to share the link with them. We're now moving on to our final presentation for the day. So for this last segment, we're going to take a look at recruitment in 2021. And we've got the perfect person to take us through these trends. I'm very pleased to introduce Rohan Shah. Rohan is the co-founder of recruitment firm Reuben Sinclair, and he's responsible for the overall growth and direction of Reuben Sinclair, while helping a number of global and national clients transform their talent acquisition strategies. So today he'll be talking about recruitment trends that PR professionals ought to be mindful of. So Rohan, it's over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Koray. Yeah, great to be speaking to everyone. So I think I've found what will be my biggest challenge in 2021, certainly as a recruiter, it's to get through my next 5 points in 5 minutes, but I'll give it a good go. So what's the recruitment market like specific to PR and comms, and what will happen this year? You know, in April 2020, recruitment activity dropped by about 80%, and we noticed an uptick around September, with the activity drop being about 40%. Today, look, we're back to pre-COVID levels in terms of activity, and some might actually argue it's better. In terms of the year ahead, I think the buoyant activity will continue, certainly through Q1 and much into Q2. I feel it will level out at some point, but it will remain a strong market because, as we've heard earlier, and certainly in my opinion, that there will be a bounce back of the economy. What are my top tips for employers? Look, I think remain open to seeing good quality candidates when you can. There's a lot of competition out there, so creating potential hiring relationships will go a long way. For job seekers, in particular sectors and disciplines, it's a buoyant market, and so it's a good time to be tapping into your network. Number two, what's the deal with salaries? So we don't see any real evidence of change in salaries, and we didn't see any during the pandemic, and we don't think they'll change too much after the pandemic. In some instances where you know, demand is particularly high, say, you know, tech, healthcare, we may see an inflation in salaries. Top tips for employers, remain competitive. You know, not having to travel to the office doesn't mean a reduction in salary. And certainly for job seekers, if you can hold on to that value, do hold on to your true value, because people are willing to pay that. Number three, you know, what are the talent bubbles? So what's hot and what's not? You know, we've heard a bit about this earlier today, but sector-wise, tech, finance, healthcare, they're all doing really well, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think, in fact, you know, as the fourth industrial revolution has been accelerated by COVID, we'll likely see a continued rise in these areas. Again, we've heard this, travel and hospitality, obviously not hot. You know, who knows what will happen here? I certainly think you need a crystal ball for this one. But what I can say is that those affected by the areas that have had a hit, people are looking to move away from it for the longer term in order to future-proof themselves. Skill set wise, we still see a demand for the publicist style media hound, but for some time now, agencies and the industry as a whole have been diversifying their services, you know. So we are seeing an increased demand for social media, for content marketing, research and insights, and more recently, even paid social. But with this comes the need for data, data analysis, and connecting that with impact. And so, you know, we can see the industry focusing on attracting people with these skill sets. Four, what's happening at entry level? There is definitely a hesitancy in the marketplace to hire someone who has very little to no experience in the industry. And we believe this is because quite a few businesses are not set up or not quite confident enough in their remote training programs to hire at entry level. And so they want people who can hit the ground running somewhat. Unfortunately, for entry-level prospects, we don't see this changing that much in H1, and that's despite the you know, the Kickstart scheme. However, you know, I think once companies trial their remote training programs at entry level, or certainly when we can go back to the offices, I'm confident this will change. So top tip for employers in this area, if you can get ahead on your remote training and development programs now, particularly for juniors, you'll have the pick of exceptional entry-level candidates. For job seekers, I appreciate how hard it is to find a role right now. And I think try and keep on top of your competition by blogging about sectors that you want to work in. This will get you noticed and it will show a passion for what you want to do. And finally, 5, what should we focus on for 2021 when it comes to talent? 1 is protect and enhance your employer brand. I think people are looking at how you treat people more than ever. So make sure that your recruitment and your retention experience is no different to how you would treat your clients. We've seen a notable rise in clients contacting us for us to focus on our consultancy and advisory work around how they can uphold or increase the value of their employer brand. 2, look to parallel industries or sectors to attract diverse talent and skill sets into the PR space. This is an absolute must if businesses want to keep up with the with the talent bubbles that I mentioned earlier. But more importantly, it's an absolute must if the industry is to sort out its diversity issues. Number 3, finally, you look to make your recruitment process as robust and fair as possible. People are looking at your recruitment process now more than ever, and this can be a clear indicator of what type of company you are to work for. Our clients are working closely with us to implement a fair and just recruitment process that eliminates layers of unconscious bias, whilst also allowing them to hire the best candidates for the job. Obviously, I'm around if you want to talk more about recruitment, or you can catch me on Rohan at Reuben-Sinclair.com. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for that, Rohan. That was perfect. We've had over 20 questions in total, and I'm conscious that we've got about 14 minutes to wrap up. So we'll try and run through as many of these as possible. If you do have any, do have a look at the questions that have already been answered, just to make sure that we don't double up on any of the questions. But I think one of the questions that stood out for me was came from Steve Dunn, and I think this was interesting because it's applicable to a lot of both agencies and PR in-house teams as well. And he asked about commercial property. He asked specifically about what organisations and PR agencies are responding to in terms of their commercial property needs and downsizing, and whether or not we're likely to see big cuts in terms of overheads and downsizing to smaller hub-style offices, or just using WeWork-style offices. Is there any panelists who want to take a stab at that? Go on, Adrian.
I'll have a shot at it because it's very, very relevant to what we're in at the moment. I think traditionally commercial property would take up about 8% of the outgoings of an agency, I think, or somewhere between 8 to 10, and that's a fairly big overhead. And so we're a fairly small independent agency, and we took an office about a year before COVID hit on a 3-year lease. But we've been fairly, we've been fortunate. We look after a lot of sectors that haven't been so badly impacted by COVID. So we kept our office, even though we can't really use it very well. But a lot of other agencies I know have got rid of their offices altogether. Ones that were in flexible working spaces completely cut ties with those. But I think the intention of those guys are to go back into flexible workspaces. But I think what's interesting for us is actually there's an opportunity if you're an independent agency and you're growing, like the agencies that Stephen was talking about. If you see your trajectory going like that, we were worried that we're going to outgrow our office by the end of our 3-year lease, but actually the other tenants in the building have left. Now's a great time to renegotiate the terms of your lease and extend that lease, because even if we do outgrow it, actually we don't anticipate that people are going to be, everyone needs to be in office at the same time. I think we'll probably adopt a 3-2 model, with either 3 days in the office or 3 days out of the office, and we haven't quite figured it out yet, but I think it'll be more flexible, more hybrid, embracing the WFA, work from anywhere model, which is emerging. So I think about 8%, if it was 8%, will go down a little bit because people won't need as much square footage, and hopefully can adapt to a new way of working that's better for everyone.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that a lot of members are telling us as well, is that there's now kind of an expectation that employees will be working from home for a couple of days a week. And I think that's going to be taking place across the board. We've had a couple of questions that have come in specifically about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And a couple of people have asked whether we could strip down the terms and look at how they impact public relations and what the trend will mean for the industry in 2021. Is there anyone who'd like to have a go at answering that? Stephen.
Yeah, so to the point about offices, I cannot wait to get out of this bloody bedroom and get back into an office. And anyone that knows my gorgeous wife will know. Imagining the two of us working in an office together side by side, you can only imagine the friction that is created during the day. So ESG, traditionally, organizations have been measured, the financial metrics of an organization has been financial. So how an organization performs, both in terms of its top line and its profit, and then how that relates, if it's a public organization, to its share price performance. Increasingly, because of a number of trends and COVID-19, amongst it, there's been this opportunity for a reset and a reflection. Michelle described that. Among that is this growing discussion that's becoming louder and louder within organizations, within management, and within corporate communications and public affairs, about the accountability of an organization should have beyond its financial metrics. And this term ESG has arisen, and ESG stands for environment, society, and governance. So how an organization sits and plays a role within society, amongst its various communities, internally and externally, its environmental impact, and then how it is managed from a governance point of view. And in each of these areas, there are metrics emerging to measure the performance of an organization. And there's a growing body of academic work that suggests that if an organization pays attention to its ESG and performs well in each of those areas, there's a huge payoff in terms of financial performance. And it's something that big organizations are looking at, but also it's the basis of the framework for the B Corp organization. And yeah, undoubtedly it's something we're seeing as we emerge from COVID.
Thanks very much for that, Wadds. Next question comes from Rachel Flynn. She asked, what areas would you recommend PR professionals to upskill in this year, or new skills to develop or learn about more? And this ties in with a couple of other questions we've had about how individual practitioners, perhaps ones that have unfortunately lost their jobs, how they can stay active and stay busy, and what learning they can undertake at this point in time that's really going to pay off in 2021. Rohan, is there anything from a recruitment point of view that you're seeing that there is an increased demand for this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned briefly in my talk, I think we're seeing an increased demand generally around for people with an understanding of things such as research and insights, content marketing, and social media. Not just particular, like I say, we're still seeing this demand for this publicist style media hound and doing the traditional media stuff, but we are definitely noticing an increased demand for people that are looking at data, providing data analysis, connecting that data with impact, looking at content marketing, increased demand for social media, as I mentioned. So I think as the industry is really embracing these areas more, we need to find, or we certainly need individuals to be upskilling in these areas.
Thank you for that. We had a question actually beforehand from Craig Gunn from PA Media, and this might be one for Vikki. He asks, what visual content trends can we expect to see in 2021? Vikki, I know you picked out quite a few interesting topics, including that concept of raw video. And is there anything in particular that you think we need to be mindful of on the visual content front?
Yeah, I think the question was about like capturing outdoor experiences, and the sub part of the question was, is it time to float something down the Thames again? To which my answer is, please, 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 no. But I think that the exciting thing is that because we're all distanced and separated and everything is through a screen now, the hunger for something tangible is even stronger than ever. We're just going to see that shifting from very intricate kind of indoor spaces into more outdoor open space venues. And I still think that visually, if you can play with creating something magical and enthralling through the use of lasers, light, reflection, even massive digital content streams, I think you can still make a real impact there, because people still crave the human connection. They just need to do it in a more distanced environment. Thank
you very much for that. Next question is really one for all agencies and in-house teams, where I ask about risks. So which risks do panelists believe will be most prominent in 2021? Michelle, I don't know if you had any thoughts on overall risks that you might be able to share.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are many risks, and as Wadds said, with new competition coming in 2021, I really do see that there will be a new breed of agencies that kind of maybe redefine what our industry and sector looks like. So I think that's a risk, and it's a risk if you really don't listen to the, the things that are happening out there. We're not soothsayers, ultimately all of us have been in this industry for quite some time, and some of the things that we've seen, and maybe we're talking about, 10, 15 years ago, influencer marketing, the impact of search on reputation, search as a kind of a indicator of intent and behavior change, and all of those things. Actually, they're here, and they're here right now. So I think the biggest risk is that you don't listen and you don't act upon the signals that are there already. So, in this hour, you've got so many, genius notes from everybody here. And what I would say is that I think increasingly, I see in all of the PR comms kind of communities that I'm in, does marketing own PR? Is PR, part of marketing? All of these kind of, definitions. The reality is, from the client perspective, we don't really care about what the different definitions are. We actually are very clear on what it is that we need to achieve. And, we were talking about left brain people looking at kind of spreadsheets and balanced scorecards and all of those things. Actually, comms as an industry and a sector needs to show its impact, not just on behavior change and sentiment and media coverage and all of those output metrics, but actually, fundamental impact on bottom line, things like client retention, for example, and talent retention, all of those things. So, that's a really long answer, but I think the signs are there. And I think the biggest challenge to agencies is actually not just looking at these trends, but actually physically doing something about it. And I think now you've got an opportunity to, really drill down into specific work streams and say, what are we doing around digital content? What are we doing around SEO? What are we doing about behaviors? What are we doing around measurement? All of these things start to really define what your offering is in this, kind of multifaceted CASO world.
Thank you, Michelle. Shayoni, I can see you nodding away furiously. Would you agree with that?
I can agree more. Lynn PR was built on outcomes, not output. So we do not take on a piece of work unless we can contribute to bottom line, whether that is in the public sector, which is mostly around behavior change, or service take up, or perhaps lead generation to some extent, or whether that's in the private sector, which is sales, retention, etc. I think this year, I think the new crop of agencies that have come up in 2020, we came up tail end of 2019, very, very focused on outcomes as well. So the 2021 crop the standard is very high. And if you're going to launch an agency, it is a great time to launch one, but really be clear on your proposition and be clear on what you can add, how you can add value to the mix that's already there.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid to say that concludes the session. We've run out of time. So that's all we have time for. A huge thank you to all of our speakers for taking their time out of their days to join us today. We covered an awful lot of ground in a very short space of time. I also want to let everyone know that the PRCA are currently running a January sale. So we have a 20% discount across all training, bespoke sessions, qualifications, specialist diplomas, and the Future Leaders program. So do go on our website and check that out. As I mentioned earlier, the recording from this event will be available on our YouTube channel, so look out for that link from tomorrow. And lastly, thank you to all of our audience from joining all around the world, and for the excellent contributions and questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all of those, but hopefully you found the session useful and insightful. So thank you again, everyone, and we hope to see you very soon. Take care, everyone.